You didn't find this video by accident. You found it because something in your life is shifting faster than you realize. The signs, the discomfort, the emotional waves, they're all pointing you toward a truth you've been avoiding. And if you're hearing this right now, it means you're already stepping into a new version of yourself. There comes a moment in your life when something shifts inside you so quietly, so subtly, that you almost miss it. It doesn't come with thunder or revelation or a voice telling you what to do. It arrives as a feeling, a soft, persistent pull in your chest, as if something deep within you is trying to get your attention. At first, you ignore it. You assume you're just tired or overwhelmed. But the feeling returns, not louder, just more certain. And without realizing it, you begin to sense that the life you've been living doesn't fully match the person you're becoming. You go through your ordinary routines, but they don't feel as natural as before. Something feels a little off, even when nothing is wrong on the surface. Conversations you used to enjoy begin to feel draining. Habits that once distracted you no longer numb you the same way. People you tolerated suddenly feel heavy to be around. And you don't know why, you only know that something inside you is shifting, and the shift is asking you to pay attention. It's confusing, because you haven't made any major changes. Your job is the same, your relationships are the same, your environment is the same, but you quietly, internally, are not the same. Psychologists call this a liminal phase, a threshold between who you were and who you're becoming. It's the in-between space where your subconscious has already evolved, but your outer world hasn't caught up yet. Spiritually, this is the beginning of alignment. Your soul always awakens before your conscious mind realizes it's happening. You may find yourself wanting more solitude, not because you're sad or isolating, but because noise doesn't sit right with you anymore. You start avoiding conversations that used to entertain you. You stop laughing at jokes that once felt funny. You lose interest in talking about people or events that don't deepen you. Instead, you crave something real, meaning clarity, honesty, peace. You want connections that feel alive. You want to understand yourself more deeply. And you want to feel like you're not just living life on autopilot. This desire for more is not greed, it's growth. It's your soul expanding beyond the limits your old self had accepted. You're like a plant that has quietly outgrown its pot, realizing the soil that once felt safe is now too small and restrictive. You feel tight in places where you once felt comfortable. You feel restless in routines that once felt familiar. This is not because your life is falling apart. It's because you're evolving beyond the version of yourself that your old life was built around. And then the detachment begins. You look at past versions of yourself, your old beliefs, your old habits, your old friendships, and they feel like distant memories. Not painful, not regretful, just distant. You realize how much of who you used to be was shaped by survival, fear, or expectations. You notice how often you settled, how much you suppressed, how deeply you ignored your own intuition. Awakening always begins with the recognition of misalignment. The moment you notice something feels off, that's your soul telling you it's time to return home to yourself. As this shift deepens, life starts sending you signs. You think of someone you haven't spoken to in months, and suddenly they appear. You consider changing a habit, and opportunities that support that change start showing up. You feel uncomfortable around someone, and the universe creates distance without you forcing it. You feel drawn toward a new direction, and you start seeing reminders everywhere, a quote, a conversation, a video, a random moment of clarity. Psychologically, this is your reticular activating system tuning into what matters to your evolving identity. Spiritually, it's guidance. And this is the part most people underestimate. Awakening doesn't start when you understand it. Awakening begins long before your conscious mind catches up. It begins the first moment you feel that tiny spark of something needs to change. It begins in the discomfort you keep ignoring. It begins in the nights you lie awake replaying patterns you no longer want to repeat. It begins in the sudden clarity that pulls you away from what once felt familiar. It begins in the way your intuition whispers through your exhaustion. This isn't you anymore. These early signs don't feel like enlightenment. They feel like confusion. They feel like restlessness. They feel like sadness without a clear reason. They feel like looking at your life and realizing you're no longer willing to pretend. They feel like wanting to slow down, wanting to breathe, wanting to understand why your heart feels heavier or softer than before. But beneath that emotional fog, something is clearing, something is shifting, something is awakening, and it's you. The version of you that lived from fear is dissolving. The version of you that lived for others is stepping back. The version of you that lived unconsciously is opening its eyes. If you're feeling this, the uneasiness, the detachment, the subtle inner pull, then your awakening has already begun. You're not lost. You're transitioning. You're not breaking down. You're breaking open. And you're not confused, you're being guided. The quiet pull you can't explain is not random. It is the first sign that your soul is leading you somewhere deeper, truer, and more aligned than anything you've known before. This is where it starts. There comes a point in your awakening where the shift inside you becomes impossible to ignore. It doesn't explode into your awareness all at once. Instead, it begins as a quiet inner tension, a conflict you can feel, but can't quite name. It's the moment your mind and your soul start pulling you in different directions. One wants you to stay where it's familiar, the other wants you to step into a truth you're not fully ready to see. And you feel that tug of war not through thoughts, but through energy, through emotions, through subtle discomfort that keeps tightening its grip until you finally stop and ask yourself what's happening. Your mind speaks first. It always does. The mind is loud, logical, protective. It reminds you of the rules you've lived by, the identities you've worn, the beliefs you inherited. It tells you what is reasonable, what is safe, what is expected. It wants clarity, certainty, control. It wants linear steps, guarantees, familiar patterns. It tries to keep you in the places it understands, even if those places no longer serve your growth. The mind was built for survival, not expansion. It carries memories, fears, conditioning, everything it believes will keep you from experiencing pain again. But then there is your soul, softer, quieter, but infinitely wiser. Unlike the mind, the soul does not argue, and it does not force. It whispers, it nudges, it illuminates. It pushes you through intuition, synchronicity, longing, discomfort, and a deep internal knowing that refuses to leave you alone. The soul doesn't care about logic or safety or predictability. It cares about truth, authenticity, alignment. It sees beyond the limitations your mind has been trained to believe. And when your awakening begins to accelerate, your soul becomes more insistent, pulling you toward the life you're meant to live, not the life you've been conditioned to accept. This inner conflict is one of the clearest signs of awakening. You feel torn between holding on and letting go, between staying where you're comfortable and stepping into the unknown, between the familiar patterns that kept you safe and the unfamiliar path that feels strangely right even though you can't explain it. You begin to sense that the world inside you is shifting faster than the world outside you, and that mismatch creates emotional turbulence. It looks like anxiety. It feels like overthinking. It shows up as random waves of fear or sadness or restlessness with no obvious trigger. But what's really happening is that your mind is reacting to the change your soul has already accepted. This is why you feel confused, why some days you feel brave and inspired, and the next day you feel scared and small, why your emotions are unpredictable, why you feel a strange mix of clarity and chaos at the same time. The mind and the soul are speaking in two different languages. The mind is saying, "Don't you dare change anything," and the soul is saying, "You can't stay here anymore." Your awakening intensifies the moment you can no longer silence either voice. Psychologically, this tension is known as cognitive dissonance, the discomfort that arises when your internal truth contradicts your external behavior. When who you are becoming clashes with who you used to be, you begin questioning everything. Your relationships, your habits, your beliefs, your desires, your boundaries. Things you used to tolerate suddenly feel unbearable. People you used to cling to suddenly feel wrong for your spirit. Dreams you once chased no longer excite you. And even if nothing has changed on the outside, everything has changed on the inside. This is not instability, this is awakening. You start noticing the moments when your soul speaks, the random clarity that appears when you're quiet, the sudden no rising in your chest when someone crosses a boundary you once ignored, the gut feeling that tells you to walk away from something that doesn't align, the flash of insight that arrives when you're not trying to think your way to an answer, the intuition that becomes too accurate to dismiss, the sense of knowing that cannot be explained, only felt, but then the mind pushes back. Be realistic. You're overreacting. Don't ruin what you have. Stop imagining things. You're not ready. The mind pulls you toward the familiar. The soul pushes you toward the truth. And you stand in the middle, feeling the tension build inside your chest, inside your decisions, inside your relationships, inside your silence. This is the battlefield, not outside you, within you. As the awakening deepens, one thing becomes clear. The soul doesn't get louder, but the mind loses its power. The mind begins to realize that not every fear is a danger, not every ending is a threat, not every unknown is a risk. The mind starts loosening its grip, not because it wants to, but because it has no choice. You can't unknow what you've discovered. You can't unsee what you've realized. You can't force yourself back into an identity that no longer fits. The soul has already expanded. The mind is simply adjusting. And in this adjustment, you begin to understand that the conflict inside you is not a sign that something is wrong. It's a sign that something is waking up. You begin to see that fear is not always danger. Sometimes it's the doorway. You begin to see that intuition is not imagination, it's memory from the future. You begin to see that your discomfort was never punishment, it was guidance. And you begin to see that your mind is not your enemy, it's just afraid of losing control. So you learn to honor both. You hold your mind gently, soothing its fears, reminding it that you're safe, and you follow your soul softly, trusting the deeper knowing inside you. This is the moment where the war inside you becomes growth. The tension becomes transformation. The inner conflict becomes alignment. And without realizing it, you begin stepping into a new version of yourself, not because you forced it, but because the truth inside you became too loud to ignore. One of the clearest signs that your awakening is accelerating is the way your emotions start to hit differently. Not because you're becoming more sensitive, and not because life is getting harder, but because you're finally beginning to feel things you once pushed away. There's a shift happening beneath the surface, a deep stirring in places you've ignored for years, and suddenly the emotions you used to suppress begin rising with a force you can't negotiate with anymore. This is where people often think they're breaking down, but they're not. They're breaking open. It usually begins in small, unexpected moments. Someone says something slightly disrespectful, and instead of brushing it off like you always did, you feel it heavy in your chest. You try to move on from it, but something inside you refuses to let it slide. Or maybe you get triggered by a comment, a memory, a tone of voice, and you can't understand why such a small thing hits such a deep nerve. You might feel ashamed of your reactions, thinking, "Why am I so emotional lately?" But this is not emotional instability. This is emotional awakening. For most of your life, you've learned to survive by suppressing. You were taught to hold it in, stay strong, move on, don't feel too deeply, don't express too loudly. You learn to internalize your pain just to keep the peace. You learn to hide your disappointment, your anger, your sadness, your fear, because feeling it fully would have made your world too complicated to manage. But an awakening doesn't let you stay numb. It asks you to feel. And when the soul decides it's time to heal, all the emotions you buried quietly begin rising to the surface, demanding to be acknowledged. Psychologically, this stage is profound. It's the resurfacing of emotional material stored in your subconscious, everything you never processed, everything you avoided, everything you rejected, now returning because it's ready to be integrated. Spiritually, it's the clearing of energetic blockages, the dissolving of old wounds, the release of emotional weight you were never meant to carry into the next chapter of your life. What feels like chaos is actually cleansing. This is why your triggers become more intense. Triggers aren't random explosions of emotion. A trigger is the soul pointing at the exact spot where healing needs to happen. It's the internal spotlight revealing where an old wound is still active. You don't get triggered because someone suddenly harmed you. You get triggered because someone touched the part of you that's already hurting. The awakening isn't creating new pain. It's revealing the pain that's been sitting in the dark. Sometimes you'll notice that certain people suddenly drain your energy, even when they're not doing anything wrong. Their presence feels heavy, their words feel sharp, their energy feels misaligned with you. This isn't judgment. This isn't you becoming negative. This is clarity. You're no longer able to emotionally tolerate environments, relationships, or behaviors that force you back into your old patterns. Your soul is pushing you out of misalignment. And then there are the moments where you feel emotional for no clear reason. Moments when your chest tightens, your throat aches, or your stomach knots up even though nothing external happened, but something internal did. A memory resurfaced, a belief cracked, a wound loosened, a truth whispered. You're feeling emotions at the depth they were always meant to be felt. This is what happens when numbness wears off. Sensitivity returns. But sensitivity is not weakness. Sensitivity is awareness. You may notice yourself replaying old experiences in your mind, not obsessively, but reflectively. You begin seeing the childhood wounds, the patterns you inherited, the relationships that shaped your insecurities, the ways you abandoned yourself just to be loved. It's painful, yes, but it's also liberating, because you're no longer emotionally blind. You're starting to see with the eyes of your soul, not the conditioning of your past. At this stage, many people think they're regressing. They say things like, "Why am I crying so easily?" Or, "Why does this hurt so much?" Or, "Why can't I ignore things like I used to?" But the truth is, you're not going backward, you're going deeper. You're finally accessing the layers you once shut down. You're making contact with the parts of yourself that have been waiting years for you to listen. The emotional intensity is not a setback. It's a breakthrough in progress. And then something shifts. Slowly, quietly, naturally, you start learning the difference between a trigger and intuition. You start recognizing which emotions are yours and which ones belong to old versions of you. You begin responding instead of reacting. You stop taking things personally because you understand the wound behind the reaction. You stop over-explaining yourself because you understand the insecurity behind needing to be understood. You stop getting attached to temporary emotions because you understand the cycles of healing. Your emotional world becomes wiser, clearer, more honest. You begin trusting your feelings instead of running from them. You begin hearing the messages within your emotions why you felt hurt, why you felt anxious, why you felt small, why you felt angry. You begin recognizing that every emotional wave has a purpose. Some wash away what you no longer need, some cleanse the wounds you never addressed, some soften you, some strengthen you. All of them awaken you. And somewhere along the way, you realize the emotional intensity wasn't a storm meant to break you, it was a tide meant to cleanse you. The triggers that once confused you now reveal your deepest truths. The pain that once scared you now guides your growth. And the emotions you once avoided become the very doorway through which your soul expands. Your awakening is not in the emotion. It's in your ability to feel it without abandoning yourself. There comes a point in every awakening where you feel something inside you collapsing. Not in a destructive way, but in a dissolving way, like pieces of your old identity are breaking off and falling away. You can't explain it logically, but you feel it energetically. A sense that the person you've been for years is slowly fading, becoming less solid, less familiar, less you. And it's terrifying because you don't yet know who's going to replace that version of you. You only know that something has ended and something else hasn't begun yet. This is the collapse of the false self, the identity you built not from truth, but from survival. The version of you shaped by childhood wounds, social expectations, fear, pressure, approval seeking, coping mechanisms, unhealed experiences, and emotional armor. For years, you lived inside that version like it was your home. You wore it like clothing that felt comfortable simply because it was familiar. But when awakening accelerates, that clothing becomes tight, suffocating, impossible to move in. The walls of your old identity begin to crack. It shows up quietly at first. You start feeling disconnected from your routines. You wake up and feel a strange emptiness, even if your life looks the same. You go through motions that once defined you, but now they feel mechanical. You feel like you're acting, performing, pretending, and you're exhausted by it. It's not depression. It's not boredom. It's your soul refusing to allow you to keep living behind a mask you've outgrown. Psychologically, this is identity disintegration, a natural phase where the outdated parts of your self-concept dissolve to make space for a new identity. Spiritually, it's death and rebirth happening inside you. Not literal death, but the emotional death of a persona that was never truly yours. And because you don't fully understand what's happening, you might interpret the collapse as losing control. But you're not losing control. You're losing illusion. Everything you used to rely on begins to feel shaky. The beliefs that once kept you safe now feel limiting. The relationships you clung to feel misaligned. The dreams you built out of fear or insecurity no longer inspire you. The habits you used to engage in to avoid discomfort now leave you feeling numb. You don't know what to hold on to anymore because the things you used to grip simply don't support you the way they once did. It feels like standing in a room that used to be your home, but suddenly all the walls have been removed. There may be moments where you feel like you're falling apart. You question yourself more than ever. You lose interest in things you once loved. You feel lost, empty, unanchored. But this emptiness is not a void, it's a clearing. It's the space being made for who you're becoming. And even though it feels like everything is collapsing, what's actually collapsing is only what was never authentic to begin with. This is the stage where people often say, "I don't know who I am anymore." But that confusion isn't a problem. It's a sign that you're separating from an identity that never reflected your true self. You're grieving a version of you that was built on the expectations of others. And grieving doesn't only apply to people. You grieve old habits, old beliefs, old mindsets, old selves. There's a mourning that happens silently inside your chest, a sense of saying goodbye without knowing what goodbye really means yet. You might withdraw, you might isolate, you might feel tired in ways that sleep doesn't fix, your body might feel heavy, your mind might feel foggy. Nothing is wrong with you, your system is recalibrating. You're releasing emotional and energetic weight that you've carried for years. When an identity collapses, the nervous system goes into repair mode. The body reacts, the mind resists, the soul leads. And here is the hidden beauty. The collapse is not chaos, it's order being restored. The self you built out of fear is dissolving because your soul is finally ready to express itself without disguise. The self you created to be liked, accepted, safe, understood, validated, that self is stepping aside. And what remains underneath is raw, real, unfiltered, powerful truth. Your truth, the version of you that's been buried beneath layers of conditioning. Eventually, in the quiet, in the stillness, in the solitude, you begin to sense something else emerging. A faint clarity, a subtle inner strength, a feeling that you can breathe again, even if you don't know where you're going next. The collapse cracks you open just enough for light to get in, and from that light, the true self begins to rise. You haven't met that version yet, but it's coming, and the collapse is the doorway. As the old layers of you begin to fall away, something subtle and powerful starts to awaken within you, a sense of inner knowing that feels impossible to explain, but equally impossible to ignore. It arrives quietly, almost like a soft light turning on in a room you didn't realize was dark. At first, it feels like random clarity, those small moments where something inside you says, "Pay attention," or "This doesn't feel right," or "This direction feels lighter than the others." You don't know where these feelings are coming from, but you can feel them. They feel cleaner, clearer, quieter than the noise of your mind. This is your intuition awakening. Not the overly romanticized version of intuition people talk about, but the real thing, the deep guidance that comes from a part of you that has always known the way, even when you didn't. During awakening, this inner voice becomes stronger, sharper, and more consistent. It's not loud, but it's precise. It doesn't argue, it doesn't debate. It simply reveals. It shows you what aligns with you and what doesn't, and suddenly you start noticing the difference between what drains your energy and what expands it, what feels heavy and what feels true. There will be moments when you feel guided without knowing why. You may feel drawn away from certain people without any dramatic reason. You may feel pulled toward new environments or opportunities that don't logically make sense yet. You may suddenly feel the urge to change something in your life, your habits, your boundaries, your direction, even though nothing external forced you to. Intuition doesn't wait for logic to catch up, it just moves. And when your awakening deepens, you begin moving with it. Psychologically, intuition is the subconscious mind delivering information before your conscious mind processes it. Your brain picks up patterns, nonverbal cues, emotional shifts, and subtle inconsistencies long before you're aware of them. Spiritually, intuition is the voice of your higher self, the part of you that sees beyond fear and conditioning. When awakening accelerates, both explanations merge. You begin recognizing that intuition isn't magic or imagination, it's truth, delivered quietly. You'll start noticing how intuitive insights feel different from thoughts. Thoughts are noisy, repetitive, anxious, full of what-ifs and worst-case scenarios. Intuition is still, calm, steady. It doesn't scare you, it clarifies you. Even when it guides you towards something that feels uncomfortable, the discomfort doesn't come from fear, it comes from growth. Intuition doesn't push you toward danger, it pushes you toward expansion. As your intuition sharpens, life begins to rearrange itself around it. Situations you once tolerated begin falling apart. People who aren't aligned with your next chapter lose their grip on your energy. Opportunities you didn't feel ready for begin showing up. Timing becomes strange, too perfect to be coincidence. You begin meeting the right people at the right moments. You begin receiving answers to questions you never asked out loud. You begin feeling guided in ways you can't logically explain. It's during this phase that you realize intuition isn't something you develop, it's something you uncover. It was always there. You just couldn't hear it beneath the noise of survival, self-doubt, fear, and old patterns. Awakening quiets the noise. It softens your inner resistance. It allows you to finally hear what has been guiding you your entire life. And the more you trust it, the louder it becomes. But trusting intuition is not easy at first. The mind demands evidence, guarantees, logic. The mind asks you to stay small, stay safe, stay predictable. Yet the soul asks you to leap, to expand, to step into the unknown with nothing but a feeling guiding you. And so you stand in that tension again, fear pulling one way, intuition pulling the other. But over time, you begin recognizing that intuition has never led you wrong. You think back to every moment where you felt something wasn't right and ignored it, and how that always taught you a painful lesson. You think back to every moment where something felt right, even though it didn't make sense, and how those choices ended up aligning beautifully. You begin seeing the pattern, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Eventually, you start following your intuition more naturally. Not recklessly, but confidently. And the moment you allow intuition to lead, even just a little, something shifts inside you forever. You stop chasing. You stop forcing. You stop trying to control outcomes. You stop living from fear. Instead, you start moving with the flow of your own inner truth. You begin choosing with clarity instead of confusion. You begin trusting your path instead of doubting every step. And you begin realizing that awakening is not about learning anything new, it's about remembering what you already knew. And that remembrance becomes your compass. One of the most unexpected and misunderstood phases of awakening is the loneliness that arrives quietly after everything inside you begins to shift. It's not dramatic, it's not painful in a sharp, obvious way. It comes like an empty space opening inside you, a space you don't quite know how to fill yet. You're doing the same things you've always done, yet something feels missing. It's not depression, it's not sadness. It's the emotional and energetic detox that happens when the soul pulls you away from everything that can't come with you into your next chapter. At first, the loneliness feels confusing. You look at the people around you and wonder why the connection feels thinner. You listen to conversations and wonder why they no longer stimulate you. You go to the places you used to enjoy and feel strangely out of place. You try to talk about what you're experiencing, but the words don't come out right. You feel misunderstood even when no one is trying to misunderstand you. It's like your inner world has changed languages and the outer world hasn't caught up yet. This loneliness is not a punishment, it's a clearing. Awakening strips away everything that isn't aligned with your truth, and that includes relationships built on convenience, habit, attachment, or versions of you that no longer exist. When you start returning to yourself, you naturally begin drifting from people who connected more with your wounds than with your soul. It's not their fault, and it's not yours. It's simply the energetic reality of growth. When you rise, not everyone rises with you. Psychologically, what's happening is a reorganization of your relational patterns. The parts of you that once tolerated inconsistency, disrespect, or superficiality are falling away. Your boundaries are becoming clearer. Your needs are becoming louder. Your tolerance for emotional chaos is shrinking. The old social roles you played, the peacemaker, the fixer, the listener, the person who always adjusts, begin dissolving. And when these roles fall away, so do the relationships that relied on them. Spiritually, the loneliness is the space your soul creates before bringing in the people who align with your new frequency. It's the pause between chapters, the silence before the music changes. It's where you learn that solitude is not emptiness, it's preparation. It's your soul saying, I need you to meet yourself before you meet anyone new. During this phase, you may feel a deep craving for genuine connection. Not the kind where you smile through small talk or pretend everything is okay, or suppress your truth just to fit in. You want depth. You want people who see you without you having to shrink. You want to be around souls, not masks. And because those connections are rare, the loneliness grows sharper not because you're alone, but because your standards for connection have risen. You might also find yourself pulling back naturally, not isolating in a harmful way, but retreating into your own space more often. You might feel tired around certain people even if they haven't changed. You might stop initiating conversations or stop tolerating certain dynamics. You might find it easier to be alone than to be around energy that feels misaligned. This is not disconnection. This is realignment. Your intuition is becoming selective. There will be moments where you think something is wrong with you, that maybe you've become distant, detached, or cold. But the truth is, you're not becoming colder, you're becoming clearer. You're not disconnecting from people, you're disconnecting from versions of yourself that were built on pleasing, performing, or pretending. You're not losing your social circle, you're shedding the circles that can't support your expansion. And then something shifts inside the loneliness. The emptiness begins to feel less frightening and more sacred. You start sitting with your silence without running from it. You start hearing your own thoughts more clearly. You start realizing that the solitude you feared is actually the space where the most profound self-understanding happens. It's in this space that you begin discovering who you are when no one else is defining you. Slowly, the loneliness transforms. It becomes stillness, it becomes clarity, it becomes inner grounding. You begin learning that you don't need constant noise to feel alive. You don't need constant company to feel valued. You begin learning to enjoy your own presence. You begin learning to choose connections instead of clinging to them. You begin learning to walk away without fear. You begin learning that your energy is sacred. And then, without forcing it, the right people start entering your life. People who connect with your soul, not your mask. But they can only arrive after the clearing. What feels like loneliness is actually alignment in progress. The universe clears the room before it invites in the people meant to sit at your new table. As the loneliness softens and the old layers fall away, something begins to rise within you quietly at first, almost like a fragile light flickering inside a long-sealed room. You don't notice it immediately, because healing rarely arrives with a grand announcement. It comes as small shifts, subtle moments, gentle realizations. But then, in the middle of an ordinary day, you feel something different. It's not clarity, not confidence, not certainty, but something deeper. A sense of returning, a sense of coming home to yourself. This is the rebuilding of the true self. It doesn't happen all at once. It happens moment by moment, choice by choice, breath by breath. You begin to choose differently without even realizing you're choosing. You start saying no to things you used to endure. You stop explaining yourself to people who never understood you. You stop chasing validation from places that only fed your insecurity. You stop tolerating what insults your soul. These shifts feel subtle, but they are monumental. They mark the beginning of a new identity, one that isn't built from fear, but from truth. Psychologically, this stage is known as self-reintegration, the process where your healed parts begin to weave themselves back into a coherent identity. Spiritually, it's the emergence of your higher self, the version of you that has always existed beneath the noise, the wounds, the expectations, the armor. For most of your life, you acted from the conditioned self, the self trained by past experiences, family patterns, societal norms. But now, with those layers removed, the real you finally has space to breathe. You begin seeing yourself differently. You start recognizing your worth not as something you earn, but as something inherent. You no longer feel the need to prove yourself because you're not trying to convince anyone anymore. You no longer feel desperate to be chosen because you're learning to choose yourself. You no longer feel terrified of losing people because you've stopped abandoning yourself to keep them. This shift is profound. It's the moment your internal compass resets, and something else begins to change: the way you respond to life's challenges. You stop reacting from your wounds and start responding from your wisdom. When people disappoint you, you don't collapse, you observe. When situations shift unexpectedly, you don't panic, you adapt. When someone crosses a boundary, you don't shrink or lash out, you hold your ground. You begin trusting yourself in ways you never have before, not because life has become easier, but because you've become stronger. This growth isn't loud, it's not showy. It doesn't announce itself with dramatic confidence. It shows up quietly in your decisions, in your calmness, in your clarity, in the way you speak with more intention, in the way you walk away with more peace, in the way you no longer tolerate chaos disguised as connection. You're not becoming cold, you're becoming self-aligned. There will be moments where you surprise yourself. You'll say no without guilt and feel proud instead of anxious. You'll distance yourself from relationships that drain you without over-explaining. You'll speak up when something feels wrong. You'll choose rest without calling yourself lazy. You'll trust your intuition without needing permission. These are signs that your inner structure is being rebuilt not from survival, but from self-respect. As the true self emerges, your life choices begin to shift too. You become more intentional about the environments you enter. You notice how your energy responds to different people. You choose peace over attention, purpose over comfort, depth over familiarity. You start seeking experiences that nourish you instead of distract you. You no longer chase things that don't feed your soul. And then, something even more beautiful happens. Your relationship with yourself transforms. You start treating yourself with compassion instead of criticism. You forgive yourself for the choices you made when you didn't know better. You understand your past, not from shame, but from clarity. You see your old versions not as failures, but as necessary steps toward who you're becoming. You start trusting yourself emotionally. You trust your feelings. You trust your intuition. You trust your timing. You choose rest when you need it. You ask for what you deserve. You protect your energy. You show up for yourself. You stop abandoning your needs. For years, you've been taught to prioritize everything and everyone else. Now you're finally prioritizing you. This rebuilding phase is delicate. Some days you feel powerful, grounded, alive. Other days you feel uncertain, tired, even afraid. But that fluctuation doesn't mean you're going backward, it means you're integrating. Growth is not linear. Awakening isn't a straight line. Some days you will rise, some days you will retreat, but the direction is always forward, even when it feels like you're standing still. In this phase, you begin sensing a new future forming inside you. You don't know the details, you don't know the timeline, but you feel the pull, a sense of purpose, a sense of expansion, a sense of calling. You can't articulate it yet, but you can feel it in your chest, in your intuition, in your energy. Your soul is preparing for something bigger, something deeper, something more aligned. And as this new self strengthens, something becomes clear. You are no longer the person you were when this awakening began. You're softer, but stronger. Quieter, but more powerful. More grounded, less reactive. More intuitive, less afraid. You are becoming the version of yourself you were always meant to be. Not the one shaped by the world, but the one shaped by your truth. And this version is just beginning to rise. There comes a moment, somewhere in the quiet after the storm, where you realize you've crossed an invisible threshold inside yourself. You can't pinpoint exactly when it happened. There wasn't a single moment of revelation, no dramatic awakening scene, no burst of clarity that suddenly changed everything. Instead, it happened slowly, like dawn rising. You notice it in the way you breathe, in the way you speak, in the way you move through the world. You're not the same person who began this journey. Something inside you has shifted permanently, and once that shift happens, there is no going back. It's subtle at first. You start sensing that you're seeing the world through a different lens. Things that once confused you now make sense in a deeper way. Patterns that once trapped you are suddenly visible. You're no longer fooled by distractions, illusions, or emotional bait. You see red flags instantly. You sense misalignment with striking clarity. You no longer romanticize what hurts you, and you no longer cling to what is fading. Your intuition has become too clear to ignore. Your boundaries have become too natural to negotiate. Your vision for yourself has become too real to betray. You find yourself choosing peace in situations where you used to choose chaos. You walk away from arguments that once hooked you. You stop trying to convince people of your worth. You stop over-explaining. You stop shrinking yourself to make others comfortable. You stop doubting your feelings. You stop betraying your body for approval. You start valuing your energy like it's something sacred because it is. For the first time, you feel an inner stability that doesn't depend on what's happening around you. Your center is no longer outside of you, it's within you. There's a moment where you suddenly realize you've stopped craving the things that kept you trapped. The validation, the noise, the attention, the distractions. The patterns you used to repeat unconsciously now feel foreign, almost impossible to return to. You don't need the highs that used to numb you. You don't fall for the temptations that used to derail you. You don't chase after things that aren't meant for you. It's not discipline, it's evolution. You've outgrown versions of yourself you once thought you'd never escape. And then comes the clarity, the unmistakable sense that your soul is leading your life now. You start feeling connected to something deeper, something wiser, something steadier. You trust your path even when you can't see where it's leading. You trust your emotions even when they don't make logical sense. You trust the endings even when they hurt. You trust the timing even when it's slow. You begin to understand that everything in your life, every person, every experience, every heartbreak, every synchronicity was a piece of a larger design guiding you home to yourself. Awakening doesn't make life easier. It makes you more conscious. You still face challenges, but you face them with awareness instead of fear. You still feel pain, but you no longer drown in it. You still experience uncertainty, but you move through it with grace. The difference is that you no longer run from yourself. You stand with yourself. You hold yourself. You stay present. You let life move through you instead of letting life break you. In this stage, reality feels different. Not because the world changed, but because you did. You walk through life with a quiet confidence, a grounded presence, a calm strength. People notice it even if they can't name it. They feel it in the way you carry yourself. They sense it in your silence. They feel it in your authenticity. You are no longer performing, you are simply being. And that being has a gravity to it, a softness and a power that can only come from someone who has met themselves deeply. There's a beauty in the way you begin to honor yourself. You treat your inner world like a sacred garden. You pay attention to your boundaries, your needs, your emotions. You no longer abandon yourself for temporary comfort. You no longer negotiate your worth. You no longer dilute your truth. Everything you do, the way you speak, the way you show up, the way you say no, the way you choose, comes from a place of authenticity. You're no longer trying to be someone, you've become someone. And then something extraordinary happens. You begin to feel alive in a way you've never felt before. Not because everything is perfect, but because everything is real. You feel connected to yourself, connected to life, connected to something bigger. You feel guided, supported, led. You sense the path unfolding beneath your feet, even when you can't see the full map. You trust the unfolding, you trust the timing, you trust the journey, you trust yourself. You may still have moments of doubt or fear. Awakening doesn't erase your humanity, it deepens it. But now, you move through those moments with awareness instead of panic. You hold your fear gently, you sit with your sadness openly. You let your emotions move through you without suppressing them. You've learned that feeling is not weakness, it's wisdom, and that vulnerability is not danger, it's strength. There comes a moment where you realize that awakening isn't something that happened to you, it's something you stepped into, something you allowed, something you opened yourself to. The person you've become is not an accident. It is the result of every quiet moment of courage you chose, every boundary you held, every truth you honored, every intuition you followed, every wound you healed, every version of yourself you let go of. And when you reach that moment, the moment you can look at yourself and say, I am finally becoming who I was always meant to be, that is when you understand the truth. You didn't awaken slowly. You didn't awaken someday. You didn't awaken accidentally. You awakened the moment your soul whispered, enough. Enough of shrinking. Enough of pretending. Enough of betraying yourself. Enough of repeating your wounds. Enough of living a life that didn't feel like yours. You awakened the moment you chose yourself. And now, you are rising.